Good morning, guys. Darrell here. I am out on a beautiful day as we record our Sunday school lesson for June 14th. And the point of today's lesson is this. Jesus calls us to have faith in his ability to heal both the physical and the spiritual. So many times we would read in Scripture that so many people were focused on just the physical healing aspects, but Jesus focuses on both. Like, yeah, I can physically heal you, but I want to spiritually make you whole as well. So I kind of think of it this way: as a parent of three wonderful kids and a fourth on the way, I never ever want to have to potentially endure my kids needing treatment at like a St. Jude's Hospital or Children's Hospital, places like that. I know those places are good places, and parents will bring their kids there in the hopes of a cure and things of that nature. But it's kind of a last resort. Oh my gosh, we've tried this, we've tried this, we've tried this. We've gotten this opinion, that opinion, 4 or 5 different opinions, and then here we go. We're going to place it in your hands because we know that certain hospitals specialize in children and do a wonderful job with that. So we expect this healing or cure to come about hopefully there, or they'll get better treatment there. But it's kind of a last resort kind of deal. If we're not careful, we do that oftentimes when it comes to Jesus. We go to him as a last resort. We know you can heal, we know you can cure, but I'm going to try all these different things by myself first. And that's just not the way it's supposed to be. But today I want to dive into Mark chapter 5. That's where today's passage is going to find us. It's Mark chapter 5. We're going to talk about Jesus healing a woman. We're going to talk about the daughter of Jairus. It's going to be an interesting lesson today. I really enjoy it. We're going to focus on verses 21 through 43 today. But let's start off with reading 21 through 29. 21 kind of sets the stage. 21 through 24 sets the stage, and then we really dive into the meat of it, starting in verse 25. But here it is. And I'm reading from the ESV. It says this: "And when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered about him, and he was beside the sea. Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, 'My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, so that she may be made well and live.' And he went with him. And a great crowd followed him and thronged about him." So we read this. I think it takes, this is really neat to me, because here's Jairus, one of the rulers of the synagogue. He demonstrates his real need and his sincerity because, hey, I'm one of the teachers. I'm one of the rulers of the synagogue. I'm one of the guys who organizes these things, one of the Pharisees. Most of them are Pharisaical. So here he is. He's like, hey, I know that you're the real deal. I've heard so many things about this, and I trust in that. So he falls to Jesus' feet. He demonstrates his need and sincerity, like, hey, I love my daughter. Please, I know you can do this. Lay your hands on her. She'll be made well and she'll live. Well, great crowds follow. We get to verse 25. Here we go. "And there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and who had suffered much under many physicians, and she had spent all that she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard reports about Jesus, and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, 'If I just touch even the hem of his garment, I will be made well.' And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease." So here we go. It's like, whoa, we're telling 2 different stories. So we got Jairus talking about his daughter. He implores Jesus, hey, please, I know you can do this. And then here we are. What's happening, Mark? You're telling us a different story. There's all these people coming about him, following him, thronged about him. And then here's this woman who's had this issue of blood for 12 years, right? She had suffered greatly, but she's kind of an interruption in the story here. Jesus is on his way to tend to Jairus' daughter, right? So here's this lady. She has suffered the physical. She has suffered emotional scars. This lady carried baggage with her everywhere she went because of this incurable disease. We read in verses 25 through 27, we see that she had this discharge of blood for 12 years. She had suffered because, or at the hands of doctors, she had actually gotten worse. there had been reports that Jesus came up and she just knew if I could just touch his garment, not even Jesus himself, just his clothes. That's always interesting to me. But here she is. She's similar to a leper in that she was unclean. She has to tell everybody that she's unclean. She essentially has to let everybody know, because hey, if I touch her, I'm gonna get it. Just like they believe that if you just touched her, you were gonna essentially get what she had. She could not worship in the temple with the other women. There were designated sections for the women to worship. Women and men didn't commingle in the worship together. And she wouldn't have been allowed to worship essentially in the women's wing of the temple. But here she is. She has suffered the physical, the emotional trauma of this incurable disease. I just think, man, I can't place myself in her shoes. I can't imagine everybody just thinking, excuse me, that I'm unclean. Maybe, I don't know, maybe if I had like coronavirus or something, people might think that, and it might be something similar to that. I hope that doesn't happen. But this lady, she had hemorrhage of blood that had made her unclean for a long time, 12 years, right? So she was cast out of Jewish life, wasn't really hanging out with people. But merely touching another person would essentially, in their view, transmit this sickness to them. So there was no hugging, there was no handshaking, there was no pat on the back, good job. No. So I'm sure she longed for some kind of physical interaction. She needed human contact. I just want to hug on you and love on you and say hi to you and greet you with a handshake, or in certain cultures greet each other with a kiss on the cheek and things of that nature. I just want to be able to talk to you. So that's essentially what's going on here. So here's the deal too. She had spent all of her money. In Luke's account of this, and Luke is a doctor, for those that don't know, so Luke was a doctor. He pretty much says, yeah, they didn't help her at all because they said that she was uncurable. So why waste our efforts on her when it can't be cured? That's essentially what Luke records in his gospel. So here she is, spending all of her money, no help at all. She was actually worse, Scripture tells us. And every attempt at healing, it just increased her suffering more and more and more. Just more suffering. And her desperation, it just grew and grew. She became desperate for money, desperate for interaction with people, desperate for a cure. She needed something. She needed this. So she did not know the full power of Jesus, okay, but she understood some things. All she had was a simple, but it was very profound faith. Like she knew who he was. He could do what others couldn't. And she had heard that. She had possibly seen that herself. She somehow knew that he alone would cure what everybody else had failed to cure. And she even went as far as thinking, I can do this if I just touch his clothes. That's crazy on the surface of it, right? Like if somebody just touches my clothes, you're going to be made whole. That doesn't sound accurate. So it's just interesting to me how desperation leads her to Jesus right here. She's just desperate for this. If I could just touch his garments, I'm going to be made whole. And then we see 29. Immediately, she does so, and the flow of blood dries up, and she felt in her body that she was healed right on the spot, immediately, in verse 29. So let's move on from there and look at verses 30 through 34. And Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him, immediately he turns around in the crowd and he says, "Who touched my garments?" And his disciples are essentially like, "What are you talking about, man? You see the crowd pressing around you and you say, 'Who touched me?' Almost like to say, dude, everybody's touching you because there's throngs of people all over us. I don't know who touched you, Jesus, because there's a bunch." Verse 32, he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, she came in fear and trembling, and she fell down before Jesus and told him the truth. And he said to her, and I love this, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." Wow. Okay, so she understood shame. So she comes to Jesus in fear and in trembling. Why should she be ashamed? We just talked about how there was just a ton of people. They were just basically bouncing off of one another like a big mob. There's just a ton of people just right there, like some big mosh pit, here we go, trying to get to Jesus, trying to talk to Jesus. His disciples are around him. But there's people everywhere. I look to my left, boom, here, everywhere. They're just all around. So here she is, a person who's not supposed to touch anybody. So she might have felt shame because, oh my gosh, I touched so many people just trying to get to Jesus. So now she's essentially made a ton of people ceremonially unclean also. So she's like, oh, now I got to admit that it was me. So what's going to happen there? But notice that her fear is so cool and that it leads to faith here. Her fear leading to faith, she testifies of her confidence and her sincere gratitude toward Jesus. That she tells him, she falls down before him and tells him the entire truth, the whole truth here. She had been shunned by others because of this disease. Priests had confirmed it. People had turned on her on the streets, like, no, we're not going to talk to you, we're not going to deal with you, we're going to ignore you. Like, you have the plague, don't touch us, don't come near me. So she was treated essentially like a walking plague. You are dead to us. Like a zombie, you're dead to me, and I don't want anything to do with you. It's basically what she was told every single day. To the culture, she was absolutely worthless. I mean, nothing. She was less than nothing to them. Imagine the worst job imaginable at that time. But they didn't have a disease, right? She was beneath them. Jesus, however, took a walk one day. Isn't that cool? Jesus takes a walk one day. Something as simple as that. So by this point, she knows, again, I said it earlier, she knows that Jesus is her only hope. And here it is, by faith, what does she do? She ran. Like, I got to get to him. He's it. I've suffered for 12 years. He's the cure. So she runs, she touches his garment, and that touch, now, wait a minute. It's going to make Jesus unclean. So now what's going to happen? Jesus is around all these people. Jesus, you're going to be ceremonially unclean, right? Because you've been touched by this impure person who's come upon you. But when she touched him, it's so cool, the reverse happened. Jesus, I mean, it's just like sin in my life, where my life is upside down and Jesus turns it right side up. It's the same thing here. Jesus reversed all of that and says, no, your touch doesn't make me unclean because, hey, I'm Jesus, but it makes you clean. And that's exactly what happened. That's what the touch of faith granted her. He had made her clean. And that's such an amazing moment. It's the same as us. It makes us whole again when we come to Jesus and we admit how unclean we are and we long for his purity. Lord, please, I know that the precious blood of the Lamb was spilled for me. Lord, please come over and make me white as snow. Purify my heart. Make me clean and whole again, Lord, and all in on you. Well, this lady here, her faith had made her clean. And Jesus, he takes what we can't live with, and he gives us what will make us live forever. That's such an amazing thing. He takes what we can't bear any longer, and then he gives us what we can only dream of. Like this lady was going to go on and live a normal life now. Shame is a powerful emotion. It's powerful, and it's a thing that is a struggle. There's a difference between guilt and shame. But Jesus says, look, I am greater than all of these things. You don't have to be ashamed. We can get past this. I want you to follow me. I want you to get rid of the hopelessness that you feel in your life and realize that I am the living hope. I am the answer to every question you have. I am the cure for what ails your heart. I am the cure for what ails your body, your mind, your soul. Jesus is it. He's where it's at. What is really cool to me is verse 34. So Jesus wanted to heal this woman deep within. He wanted her shame to be gone. We're going to be done with that. So he turns to all these people and he says, who touched me? He calls her out. And she has to come out and expose herself. She's forced to step out of the crowd to become the center of attention. Like, to all these people who despise her because she's an unclean, nasty person to them, right? That's what has to happen here. But what is Jesus actually doing in that moment? He's saying, look, I know these people have shunned you, and they know everything about you. They know your sickness. They know your struggles. and they don't want to be near you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call you out in front of all of them. I'm going to cure you in front of all of them. I'm going to welcome you. I'm going to call you daughter in front of all of them and say, look, even though your own family has shunned you, even though the people that you love dearly don't want to be around you, I am God, and I want you to be a part of my family. He is God the Son. He says, look, I need you to be my daughter. You are one with me because of your faith. Oh, what an amazing thing. Your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. And he calls her out in front of everybody. Yes, I want everyone to know what has happened to you right here, because they no longer need to shun you and look at you and make you feel shame, because Jesus is far superior to your shame, far superior to those people. He's basically letting them know, hey, she is coming back to the community and you need to welcome her with open arms. That's what Jesus tells them. So then let's move on to Mark chapter 5, verse 35 through 43. So here we go. We've just ended that really cool setup here where he heals the lady and she's back in the community. Well, then here it is, kind of a transition. We're kind of back to Jairus again, verse 35. While he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house some who said, your daughter is dead. Talking about Jairus' daughter. Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? Don't be a bother to Jesus anymore. She's already gone. She's dead. Nothing can be done. But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, do not fear, only believe. And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. And they came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and Jesus saw a commotion with people weeping and wailing loudly. And when he had entered, he said to them, why are you making a commotion and weeping? This child is not dead, but sleeping. Verse 40, and they laughed at him. They laughed at Jesus. But he put them all outside. He took the child's father and mother and those who were with him. And he went in there where the child was. And he took her by the hand and he said to her, Talitha Kumi, which means, little girl, I say to you, arise. And what happens? There's that word again I love. Immediately, the girl got up and began walking, for she was 12 years of age. And they were immediately overcome with amazement. And he strictly charged them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. This doesn't really play into my lesson at all here, but I think it's really cool. She's 12, been afflicted potentially her whole life with some things, I don't know. And the lady that was just healed was afflicted for 12 years. So she's been afflicted as long as this little girl's been alive. I think that's kind of a cool thing there as well. So, but we look at verse 35. We have this interruption here. Jairus has received some terrible news. Your daughter is dead. Well, wait a minute. What a weird segue. Verse 34, Jesus says, daughter, your faith has made you well. He calls the lady his daughter. And now, bam, verse 35, your daughter, Jairus, is dead. Whoa, okay. Well, then verse 36, we move on. Jesus is overheard and he says, don't fear, only believe. Jesus says, hey, look, here's the deal. Faith is the antidote for fear. Hey, have faith. That's the cure for this fear that you have. So Jesus wasn't surprised by this. Yes, the girl died, but he's not concerned with her death. He's concerned more about what Jairus believes. That's interesting. Okay, he's concerned about Jairus' belief here. So her death was just part of the plan of the day. He's like, hey, Jairus, have faith. Have faith. So on this side of the cross, we understand that death is not an unconquerable enemy to Jesus. We know that. But Jairus didn't. And honestly, his disciples didn't really fully understand that yet either. But so when they hear the phrase, don't be afraid, only believe, it's like, well, what good is that going to do me? Maybe somebody thought that. Maybe some of his disciples thought that. Maybe Jairus thought that. It's not recorded that way. But I could just imagine that going through their mind. Just believe, you'll be okay. Like, no, my daughter's dead, man. What do you mean I'm going to be okay? But it's interesting, just a glance through the Gospels, and you'll see that the Bible includes several miraculous healings. In Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, we see it all throughout. We see Jesus do tons of amazing things. But it's not the temporary healing of this life that Jesus wants us to place our full trust in. No. He wants us to realize that he's way more than that. if we put our hope in this world and the healing of it, then no matter how long we live, suffering still wins. We're going to eventually die anyway. We're going to eventually die. Even the woman who was healed eventually died. Even the little girl who is healed here eventually died. So they're still promised to death. But so the greatest healing is this. It is with Jesus as the eternal one, living with him for an eternity, because he paid the ultimate sacrifice for us, the ultimate price that we owed. He paid it for us. It's to that hope that we must look. It's to the hope which Jesus calls us to believe. And that's essentially what he's saying to Jairus. Like, look, more than your daughter, believe in me. Believe in me, more than just for healing of her. Now, as a dad, I don't know that I could do that in that moment. Like, man, it's about my kid right now. I need you to take care of her if you're able to do that. So trusting in Jesus, it's the proper response to all of our troubles, physical and spiritual. So here it is. I love verse 40. They laugh at him. Okay, so what he does, he puts him outside. I see that one of two ways, maybe both. Jesus is showing authority and says, look, you want to laugh at me? You want to make fun of me? Then just get out of here. Go outside. You don't even get to watch what I'm about to do. Kind of like a punishment sort of deal. I could also see it as, she's dead. So Jesus, by touching her, would become, there's that ceremonially unclean again. So if he touches this dead and makes her live again, which he does, and people see it, then people might think he's ceremonially unclean. I don't know, it could be either of those things, it could be both. But in any event, I think it's interesting. He touches the dead, he could become unclean. Obviously he doesn't. She lives and can now face a new day. It's always interesting to me. He takes her by the hand and he says to her, Talitha Kumi. Like everything else in my translation is in English, but this is in Aramaic. Mark here is emphasizing, he's reinforcing this eyewitness quality account of his gospel. Talitha Kumi, which it says, little girl, I say to you, arise. That's what it is in Aramaic. So we have all these things going on. Well, one day, her body died. One day, Jairus died. One day, the lady who had the issue of blood for 12 years, she died. We know the disciples died. All these people, right? We know that Jesus died for our sins, but he arose 3 days later. So one day, my dying body, because I'm a believer in Jesus, one day this dying body will be raised to the newness of life. Yeah, I can live for Jesus in the here and now. Oh, but I'm ready for the not yet. I am ready for that time when I can be in his presence for an eternity, physically with him. God will give us glorified bodies. I fully believe that God will give us these. He'll give us glorified bodies that will never hurt. They will never die again. Look, my back hurts most days. I have a herniated disc in my back. I'm not going to feel that in heaven. I'm not going to have to experience the cancer, literal cancer in this life. I'm not going to have the heart disease or the worry of some other, or coronavirus. I'm not going to worry with any of those things because I'm going to be sharing in the newness of life with other believers, some family members that I also look forward to seeing. But more importantly than any of them, I will be with my Jesus because of this glorified body. But until that day, what I can do is I can look to Jesus for hope, and I know that he's the answer. I know that he's my answer. I know that his promises are true, and I can stand on his biblical promises because he showed us in his resurrection, and he shows us on a daily basis who he is. So by faith, we that die with Christ will be raised again because of our faith, in Jesus. So trust him, don't fear, but believe. The same thing he told Jairus, don't fear, but believe. Because Jesus can take your dead life and he can restore it and give you new life, where you can get up, you can walk in the abundance and in the newness of life forever, for an eternity, in the here and now and in the not yet. But while we wait for that glorious day, the trumpet to sound, Jesus coming back for us, or we die a physical death, one of those things, while we're waiting, let's continue to worship Him with everything we have. I definitely I implore you, I urge you to place your faith, place your everything in Jesus, because He is who He says He is, and He does what He says He does. He is amazing. Put your faith, put your trust, put your everything in Him. I love you. I hope you have an amazing day, and we'll see you next.